Hey everyone, welcome to today's webinar on migrating from API version 1 to version 2. I'm Shreyashi Ghosh from the Zoho Community. This webinar focuses on API version 2.0, its benefits, and how it differs from version 1. At the end, we'll touch upon the migration API, which should be available in weeks to come to help you in the migration process. In case you use third-party resources to implement your APIs, you might want to touch base with them to make the changes. Just in case you miss anything, don't worry, we'll send you a recorded version of this webinar later. Our panel of experts includes Mahesh, our product manager for Zoho CRM API integrations, and Raghuram from our product engineering team. They'll be available throughout the session, so you can use the chat interface to ask your questions. For more clarifications, you can reach out to our support team anytime. Some housekeeping information. Audio is available through your computer and attendees are muted. Ask questions using the questions interface in GoToWebinar toolbar. Please note that this is a pre-recorded webinar. If you have any trouble listening in, please let us know via the questions box. Chakrapani, our Zoho CRM Pro, is going to take you through the webinar today. Chakrapani has been actively contributing to the community, and you can find a lot of his user educational content in the CRM community, including numerous custom functions and other useful updates on APIs. However, more on that later. Over to him.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So this is what we'll cover today. The first is the end of life period of API version 1, which is quite important because we only have a month left, and why the API version 2 is better, some of the features of API 2, and finally how to migrate from version 1 to version 2 without any loss of data, or an easier way to migrate, because in case you have 1,000 customers and you have to migrate each and every one of them manually, then it'll take a lot of time. So we have a solution for that, which enables quick migration from version 1 to version 2 with minimal coding. Sure. So the end of life period of API version 1 would be the 31st of this December, wherein the codes will still work, but there would be no support for your for the API version 1. Like, in case you give us a call and ask for any help, we will not be able to help you because it is past the deprecation date, and the sunset date would be the 31st of December the next year. So after the 31st next year, you would not even be able to use any of the version 1.0 APIs. So if you haven't migrated before then, all of your codes will become ineffective. So why API version 2.0 is better? So there are a multitude of reasons why we introduced the version 2.0 of APIs. Some of them would be increased limits, as in version 1, 25,000 API calls were the limit, but we follow a credit-based limiting system in API version 2.0, where you have about 1 million credits. And the other would be using a JSON format for input and response, which enables easier parsing of information, because JSON is a language which contains information that is much more easier to break down and analyze or use it elsewhere, because we'll be getting to that part later in the webinar. And improved security, like OAUTH 2.0 authentication protocol. Previously we used the auth token mechanism, wherein you had to expose the code every time you have to make an API call. But in case of the version 2.0 APIs, there's a lot more of improved security by providing you with 3 different types of tokens, like a grant token, access, and a refresh token. We'll also be getting to that later. And usage of API names instead of display labels. If in case you want to have a look at the different API names that are available, you could go over to your CRM like I did here and go to setup, and in setup click on APIs under developer space, and once you do that, there's a tab called API names here, which lists you the API name of all the modules, and furthermore you could also view the API names of certain fields. So not just the renaming of modules, but even if you rename some fields, the API name stays the same. For example, let me show you an example so let me rename it to just a code or something else in the leads module. I go over here, modules and fields, and select the leads module, the standard layout. So it says pick list 1. So once I edit properties, let's say I rename it to states. I'm done. I'm saving it. Standard layout was updated successfully. Now I go over to view the API names. I go over here. I go to the leads module, and you see the name has been, the display field label has been changed to states, but the API name still says pick list 1. Of course, you can also edit and change the API names if you wish to do so, because let's say you rename the properties module to states, and then you want to create another properties module for buildings which are not estates, like an apartment. So in that case, you could probably rename it here, and if you could change it in your code, that's well and good. No harm there. And the next would be a subscription API. We'll get back to that later because it's quite convenient API which you can use whenever you're using multiple different applications. And the other would be the bulk API. So for in cases where you have a lot of records to process, for example, let's say 100,000, then in that case provide you with some other options. We're giving out this bulk API which lets you to fetch or import or export 200,000 records in a single API call. And furthermore, we provide some certain SDKs, software development kits, server-side SDKs, which lets you create some middleware applications between CRM and some other third party that you want to integrate. A mobile application where you can create a mobile app, a customized mobile app which uses the data from CRM by using the login credentials from Zoho, and a JavaScript SDKs which allows for cross-domain support for your website or an application with Zoho CRM. I'll be explaining all of them later by the session. So now the version 2.0 of APIs, the one that's being in the center stage right now. So these, like I said before, an enhanced method of authentication using OAuth 2.0. REST APIs that we provide all of the resources in CRM, and by resources I mean they could be a module or a record or a setting or a user information, organization information, all of that stuff. We provide all of them as APIs, so you could play around with the data of, not exactly play around, it's quite serious business. So you could manipulate information from anywhere within the CRM however you want, using all of those APIs. And now would be the bulk APIs that I've just described, like make 200,000 records in a single API call. Server-side SDKs which you can use to create middleware. Subscription, once again, to get instant notifications for certain actions that could be performed in your CRM. JavaScript SDKs for cross-domain support. Mobile SDKs to create mobile application. So what would be the benefits of using OAuth 2.0 authentication? One would be it's quite an easy way of authentication. You just need to know the client secret, client ID, and a redirect URL. Which you would have to provide with Zoho. So first thing, you have to register your client application with Zoho. So once you do that, we'll provide you a client ID, client secret, and the redirect URL is something you guys mention it by yourselves. So once you do that, with the client ID and client secret, you would be able to generate all of the different tokens. For example, the third point here, application specific access tokens. So for each application that you register with Zoho, an access token is generated just for that application. And even better, you can use the scopes here to restrict data access. Like scopes, you could make the data be only read-only. The user would not have any permissions to edit any data, or you could have only a few modules in read-only and the rest of them as giving all permissions. So based on the scope that you provide, you would be able to, you know, control the data that's within your CRM, which you give access to the user. So whenever you want to give access to a particular user, you use scopes first to generate grant tokens and then access tokens for a specific application. So once you do that, and once you give the access tokens to your user, then he would be able to view only the data that you want him to view. So which turns out to be a much better protection compared to the version 1.0 of APIs, wherein there's only one auth token and you would have to give it to them and he would be able to access all of the information straight away. And also there's an easy option to revoke tokens. It's just a single API call wherein once you do that, the access token that is provided to your user becomes invalid. And an example of how the OAUTH 2.0 actually works. So there are 4 resources here. One would be the application, that's the client application. It could be the application that you're developing or that you're currently using. And one would be the resource owner, and that would be us. We have, Zoho CRM's resource. And one is the authorization server, and finally the resource server. So whenever a client application needs access to data from CRM, and needs access to an API, you have to first send in an authorization request to Zoho. That could be done using either the self-client option or the web-based redirection URL method. We'll be getting to that later. So once you hit in an authorization request, you will be able to get a grant token. A grant token is something which is a one-time token that is used to generate access and refresh tokens. So, and the grant token in a web-based redirection URL method is value. It is only available for 1 minute, after which it gets expired. So once you send that grant token back to us, you will be able to get the access and the refresh token. So once you've got your access token, you're nearly there. Once you send in your request along with the access token, the resource server then checks if the current the access token is indeed matching with the application, the client application, and also with the user. So once those are verified and those are proved to be right, you'd be able to get the resource that you want. So if you want to get a module information, then you'd get that information in a JSON format. So there are 2 types of authentication, like I said, self-client and a web-based redirection method. So let me just go over the self-client for a moment. Self-client is where in which you want to access information about your own organization. Let's say you have a CRM and you're a part of your organization, and you want to use information from within your organization using a client application developed by yourself. So in that case, you would have probably go for a self-client option wherein Zoho acts as a server, so you don't need a server to authenticate yourself. So in that case, you would probably have to set the authorized domain as zoho.com. So once you do that, you would be able to straight away get a grant token for your user ID, the email address, and using that grant token, you would be able to get access and refresh tokens and subsequently use all of the different APIs. So in case that's for your personal use, for example, you would maintain that application by yourself and no others, then in that case you would be able to use self-client, and it's a really convenient method. But instead of that, let's say you have a team which manages a single client application, like you have about 10 different people working on a single application that's integrated with Zoho CRM. In that case, there are some people who would have access to certain modules and some who don't. So there are some who would have access to some settings and some others who don't. So in that case, you could probably go for the authorization grant flow, wherein you could set up a login screen and provide a redirection URL. So whenever you initiate this method, you'd be able to you would be taken to a web page where it would ask for confirmation of authorization. You'd be able to see a screen like the client application request for the following information, and you'd be able to see all the scopes that you've given there. For example, if it's C, and there would be accept and a reject button. So once you hit accept, it's like the user gets authenticated and is sent to the redirection URL that you've provided. So since it is a web-based redirection method, once the once the authorization is done, he'll be able to go back to the to your applications page, if for example, or a website's page. That depends on you. So what I meant was, the authorization grant flow gets tokens on behalf of all Zoho CRM users. So for all of the all of the guys who are working for the client application, you would be able to, since there's going to be multiple users for a single client application, in that case, authorization grant flow is much better than using self-client option. And moving on to scoping and operation types. So like I said before, scopes are pretty important when you're generating a grant token. So let me just give you a quick example of a scope, like what you see here: Zoho CRM .modules.leads.read. So this would be a scope where the leads module is in read only. You'd not be able to edit or create any information. So the scopes can be split up into three different. One would be the service name, one would be the scope name, and one the operation type. So the service name would be the application in which you want to have the data, get the data from. Since you go to accounts.zoho.com to register your client application, you need to know which Zoho service you want to access data from. So in this case, it's Zoho CRM, and the scope name it's modules.leads. So that would define the resource that you want to get. For example, it could be modules.custom, which grants access to all of the custom modules. Modules.campaigns for campaigns module, and finally the operation type, wherein the list of possible operations are all read, create, update, and delete. And the list of scopes available would be users.o, organization.org.o, and all of the different settings available in CRM, and finally the modules. In that case, you could probably go for a group scope. So it's like grouping all of the modules into a single scope, Zoho CRM.modules.o. It gives you access to all of the modules available in CRM. So in case you want to give access like this, you could probably go for a group scope. And the multi-domain handling. So this was introduced because, for example, previously we had used only a COM domain, COM, a server in the United States, and now we have open servers in India, China, and Europe. So for people in different locations, like what I said before, the Europe, China, and India, they could use the server that is in their domain to access all of their APIs. So the authorization URL, initially you would have to go to accounts.zoho.com in order to get your grant token. And in a web-based redirection method, once you hit put forth a request to Zoho CRM to get a grant token, you'd be able to get the grant token in a URL form. And in that grant token, there would be another parameter called location. So that location parameter would be like US, CN, EU, or IN. So which would denote the location that the user currently is in. And based on that location, once you use the grant token to generate access and refresh tokens, you would be able to get an output such as this: the access token, the expiry, and the API domain here. This is very important. So now it says www.zohoapis.com, in which the location that was sent back to me would be the location US, where the com domain is prominent. So if the location parameters is EU, then the API domain would be zohoapis.eu. So in that case, whenever you want to make an API call, you would have to type in zohoapis.eu for the URL instead of zohoapis.com. Please keep in mind that your code will only work if the domain is right, and if the domain is not right, you will be able to get an error. And over to the REST APIs, API and REST standards. The following are the REST standards that we practice. The REST standards, in case you want to make an API call to get a resource like a record in a leads module, then these are the things that you require. A request URI, wherein the request is put forth in the URL as a URL, and a simple HTTP method can be used to denote what type of a request it's gonna be. Is it to fetch information, or is it to input some information or so? And the input structure which you give whenever you want to create a record within CRM. So this is not for fetching information, but this is for inputting information into CRM. So there are some structures, some JSON objects that you have to keep in mind whenever you want to input some information. And the request and response formats, it will be given in a JSON format, which you can probably use for inputting some information, creating a record, and some predefined status codes which could be used to determine where exactly it went wrong. So we'll be going over that later. And now for the request URIs. So the URL that you see here, https www.zohoapis.com/crm/v2/leads. So this URI would grant you access to all of the records available in the leads module. However, in case you want to fetch information about just specific record, in that case you could use this URI, which is different in just one parameter, leads / the ID of the lead, unique ID. For example, you could go over to CRM here, click on the leads module, and click on any one of the leads, and the number that you see here, tab /leads the number that's given here, the 16-digit number at the URL, that would be the unique ID of a record. So for each record in modules, it would have a unique ID. So you could probably give the unique IDs here and fetch information about just that one record. And let's say instead of just fetching information or inputting information, you would like to perform some actions on the information. For example, like adding a tag to a record. In that case, you could the URL would be something like this: zohoapis.com CRM v2 leads, the ID of the lead, and there's there's a parameter called actions. So in that action, after that actions, there's if you want to add a tag, you could add a tag, or there's a method called watch, which could be used to get instant notifications. That would be the subscribe APIs. I'll cover that later. And so these three URLs are how you could get information from CRM or input some information. In case you want to input a record into CRM, you should use only this URL, CRM v2/leads, because a unique ID for a lead, a record, will get created only after you create. So you shouldn't use this URL in which you give an ID yourself. That would not work. So for a get method, this this URL would be fine. But for a post method in which you have to create a record, you should use only this method of URL. And these are the the HTTP request methods. The get method that will be used to fetch records, post method like input records into your CRM, put method to to update existing information, or delete to delete the records in the module. And if it's a boolean value, then it should be just true or false. It shouldn't be a string. And number or decimal, you could just give the number as it is, no need for it to be in a string. And in case you have to, if a field contains multiple values, then in that case it should be in the form of an array, wherein you use this braces and give the values separated by a comma in string. And if it's a lookup, then it should be a JSON object. Like, since I'm going to get information about a user here, I specify the user field, and then I have to give two different information about the user. One would be the ID of the user, and one would be the username. So in that case, I would have to, if it's a lookup, I would have to give it within a JSON object. And for a module lookup, it's the same. You give the module name, and then you give the ID and the name of the module. If you have to get a module name, And the request and response formats, like I said before, they are in JSON format. So JSON allows for easier processing of information by viewing. Information can be viewed as a key value pair, like I explained in the last slide, like here, name Helen. So all of the fields that are available to get as an output, you would be able to see it as a key value pair, in which you could use a key as a variable, and you could get some information from wherever you want. And like I said before, an output that you get from using a get method, like let's say I get the information about a lead from the leads module, I could use the same output that I got, copy that, paste it as an input for creating another record, and probably just change all of the values in the for the fields. Like I could change the name, email, I could change lead source. And to the status codes, these are the list of status codes that we provide. We already defined it for in case. So by taking a look at all of the different status codes, you'll be able to see exactly where it went wrong. And finally, to some of the APIs that we have provided. And in this one, I'll be giving you you guys a demo of fetching some information or inputting some information, and I'm sure it'd be pretty useful for you guys to just straight away watch a demo instead of having me preach it over. A Postman is an application which is used for testing purposes. So now to the left here you see a collection which says Zoho CRM REST APIs. In order to get that connection, you could go to our help documentation, crm/help/api/v2, and in our REST API 2.0 help documentation, there's a button here called Run in Postman, which says Postman for Mac. So if Postman is already downloaded and you guys have it ready, then you would be able to download that collection straight away from this website, and it will get automatically created here. And there are two things that will get downloaded. One would be the collection folder here, which contains all of the APIs that we provide, and one would be that here you see an environment which says Zoho CRM. So this environment contains predefined global variables like accounts domain, client ID, client secret, redirect URI, expiry time, refresh token, access token. So you would not have to input access token every time you want to call an API. So since we set access token as global variable, and you would be able to use it whenever you call some APIs. So now I'm going over to generating your access token for the first time. So in order to do that, I need to go to accounts.zoho.com/developer console. Okay, we'll register a new client. So let's take something like Zendesk. And since I'm using a self client option because I'm the only one who's going to access the information, no one else, I give my client domain as Zoho.com and redirect URL as well as Zoho.com. But since you're using a self-client option, the redirect URL doesn't matter. You would be able to get the grant token straight away. There's no need for any redirection. And the client type should be set to web-based. And once I hit create, a client ID and a client secret is generated for me. So I take this client ID, I go over here, and in the body section of this generating your access token, you see different values here, and if it's in red, then it is a global. It means it is a global variable. So I go over here, I edit the values in a global variable, like in a current value for the client ID, I replace it with my client ID, and a client secret, I replace it again. And the redirect URL stays the same because I just gave it as Zoho.com, or I didn't give the slash. So okay, so once I've saved it here, so once I've created my client here and it gets added here, and I go over here to the more options, I click on self client, and I need to enter a valid scope. I have to type again, please bear with me. And voila, I got my access direct token, I got a refresh token, and the API domain is set to com. So I need to use Zoho.com whenever you want to make an API call, apart from generating this access and refresh token. So once the access and refresh token are generated in Postman, strictly speaking in Postman, since we have set a global variable, the new access and refresh tokens are automatically assigned to the global variables, so you don't have to call them once and again and again. And now moving over to the organization API. Let's say I want to view information about my organization, so I go over to org here. To get information about your organization, the URL would be accounts.zoho. No, I'm sorry, not the accounts. It should be www.zohoapis.com/crm/v2/org organization. And once I do that, I need to give in my header here, which is the authorization token. Give it here. So essentially it's bearer and the access token. So once you do that and once you hit send, you get an output which gives you information about your organization, like the ID of your organization and the address, the street or a country if you provided. Since I haven't, then I'm not able to see here. And the employee count, pitiful, it's just me. Please don't mind about that. And the country code is in the US. The license of the organization, like the number of users purchased, and is it a paid account, a phone number, company name, and a privacy settings, and a primary email address. So all of the information that you've specified in the CRM UI, you would be able to get using this API. On the metadata APIs, the metadata APIs are nothing but it's like getting information that is present within the field or present within the module, but there's no really information about that field or about that module. Let's say, so let me just give you guys a quick example. So in that case, there's a workaround here. I go to fields and I give them my module name as leads. The URL would be crm/v2/settings/fields and then parameter modules equal to leads. So it fetches me all of the fields available in the leads module. For the list of fields available in the the modules lead, the name of this particular field, this JSON object here, is the projection score, which is an integer field. And is it read only, or the source in which it is created? Does it have a tooltip? What's the label of the field? And what's the JSON type? The output that you get. Is it a hook? Is it a lookup, or is it available in a webhook? Is it a private field? Is it a unique field? So all of the information about that field, instead of the value present within the field, it can be obtained using the metadata APIs. And not just the field, the modules here can be used to get module metadata, and there are some others you could get the metadata of, which gives you some information about the fields or modules instead of just the values present in them. And finally, the most commonly used API is the records API. So the basic reason in which you want to use an API would be to access information present in a record. So to do that, we have split up records into two different categories. One would be bulk and one would be single. Now this is quite different from the bulk APIs, wherein you could fetch 200,000 records in one shot. This bulk here allows you to fetch up to 200 records in a single API call. That's the limit. So if you want to fetch 400 records, in that case you would have to make 2 API calls, wherein you would have to give the more information and input as like I said, page 1 per page 200, and for the second API call, page should be 2 and per page should be 200. So for example, here I go over to get the list of records. I say leads. So whenever I fetch lead information, I'm getting over all of the leads available in my system. For example, it shows me up to please bear with me. So finally until the end here, it says the count is 116, so there's no need for me to go over to a second page. It hasn't exceeded 200. And in case you want to get a single record information about a single record in a module, then you replace the module name here by leads. Give the ID of a lead. For example, I take in the ID here and I hit send, and voila, you just get one record information. And there's a list of other stuff you can use with the record API, like converting a lead into a contact. And finally, for a related list API, in case you have to update any record, then normally you would have to update the related list as well. So whenever, let's say, you update a product in the products module, then the same should be reflected in deals or in sales orders or in purchase orders. In that case, you would have to update your related list along with your there's a different that you could perform some different actions on your records. Would be like adding tags, using CRM variables as an API, and a blueprint API in which you could you could use a blueprint using just APIs. You can set up blueprints. And moving on finally towards the bulk APIs, like I said before, you could probably use 200,000 records in a single API call. You would be able to process that large amount of information, but the only drawback is that you would have to wait a while to get all of the information and be available as a downloadable file. And currently we provide only a single bulk operation, that would be to export records from Zoho CRM to outside. You do not support import of data from outside sources to CRM, but you guys don't have to worry about it. It will be released in the following weeks, like within 2 weeks or so. And moving on to subscription APIs, you could subscribe for getting instant notifications on certain actions that are performed within Zoho CRM. Like, let's say I want to get notified whenever a lead is converted, or I want to get notified whenever a deal is made, or a deal is progressed by a certain stage, or whenever I want to get notified whenever a sales order gets deleted. So in that cases, you could use the subscription APIs to get some instant notifications. This would be very helpful in if you have multiple different applications for your businesses, and you would have to get a clear picture of how the data flows within your system. And moving on to the limits, we have credit-based API limits of a million, max of 1 million credits. So for each API call, there's different credit points. So if you have to get a record information, that's 1 credit. If you want to get a bulk record information, that's 5 credits for 1 API call, and the list goes on. For example, and it follows a 24-hour throttling method, and we also follow concurrency throttling by so like I said before, in case you have multiple users working on a single application and using APIs, currently 5 different users could be accessing information. And I'm talking about the free edition, but for enterprise or professional edition, the limits are different. It's like for enterprise, the limit is 20, so 20 different users can access information from Zoho CRM at the same time, at one particular point of time. And moving on to server-side SDKs, you could probably use the SDKs that we provide to create some middleware applications which integrate Zoho CRM with your client application. Supported languages in server-side SDKs include Java, PHP, Python, and Node.js. And moving on to JavaScript SDKs, let's take the example here. Xylem is a different product company, and they have maintained a Zoho CRM account. So in that case, the Xylem website could be in the Indian IN domain, and the Zoho CRM server is in the common COM domain. So in that case, Xylem has to maintain their own server, wherein the information is sent to the server first, and then it's converted into raw information and once again sent to the CRM server to update information in their CRM. That's how the usual process goes. But instead of that, we wanted to make the process a bit easier. So in that case, you could probably use the JavaScript SDKs to create, include some lines of code in your website so that you could send this information straight away to Zoho CRM without the use of a different server. And mobile SDKs are nothing but the ones where you create and distribute customized mobile applications. You could create applications for Android and iOS. And finally, we move on to the actual migration from version 1.0 to 2.0. When I talk about migration, there are 3 cases where this could be applicable. For example, a standalone application that you've built which achieves data sync from CRM with any other third-party application, or other third-party applications that you've used for your business process, which include Zoho CRM's APIs to achieve automation or just a data sync, and functions written in Deluge to manipulate data within CRM. But the change is that there are some methods which change with regard to the API version change. So there are 3 things that you need to keep in mind whenever you want to migrate. Those 3 would be the authorization method, where you get the tokens to get each API, the INVOKE URL method, which describes the token information as well as the URL structure in which you call the APIs, and the request method, which you use to call each individual API. So when I talk about the authorization method, there are 2 types: a self-client and a multi-user client. Self-client, let's take a look at self-client option first. For a self-client user, the users who manage data from their own organization without working together with anyone else, there is a migration API in which they have to provide the old OAuth token as well as their client credentials from registering the app with registering the app with Zoho. And once they're given that along with the migration API, they would be able to get a new access and a refresh token. But the access token is valid for only 1 hour, so you could probably use the refresh token that you get to refresh access token every hour. And as a side note, the old OAuth token which you were using previously for version 1 would be available only for 24 hours post migration, the time in which you might call the migration API. After that, it will get deleted. So for a multi-user client, for each application registered with Zoho, you would have to raise a migration request with us. Once we approve that migration, you could once again use the migration API to provide the old OAuth token. Not the OAuth token, the old OAuth token, along with the new client credentials to get the new access tokens. As for the second method, the INVOKE URL changes, previously we were using the INVOKE URL method to the left of the screen. The one which says you have to give in the auth token, and which is given here, and now the URL structure for calling an API like this one. But now on the right you could see the new method in which you have to provide your access token, your refresh token, the expiry time, and the API domain, which you get using the multi-DC method. And the URL structure is given here, like API domain zohoaps.com/vr crm/v2/leads. So you could use that sort of API request URL structure to call different APIs from Zoho CRM. As for each API call, the request method has changed drastically. You could take a look to your left. The URL contains parameters auth token and the input data in the URL itself. But instead of that, in the new version of the APIs, there is a clear distinction between where what information should be given. For example, the URL here, the method in which you have to call the APIs, it could be get to fetch, post to create, delete and update. A header which contains the access token for authentication, and the body section where you give in the input to CRM. So whenever you want to create a record within CRM using APIs, you would have to give the content within the body tag. And some of the best practices of using all the API 2.0 would be to provide proper scoping of the token. Like, since it is a security measure, then you guys should make the most out of it. Like, create access tokens for only the specific scopes that you require. And concurrency handling based on you could probably regulate your API limits based on the number of concurrent users for the application, which saves you up a lot of your credits. And metadata caching. Most of the field API names, the names of APIs, the fields, or the names of the modules are not going to change over time, because let's say there's a field called last name. Even about 10-15 years later, it's going to be last name. There's nothing we wouldn't change the name to something else. So in that case, you could probably store up all the metadata in caches in your servers. So once you store them as caches, then it would be much more easier for you to access information or input some information if you have it take it directly from your cache, instead of putting a get request to get all of the metadata first before updating them. And in order to fetch information, there are two different types. One would be to display that information in your website or your application. In that case, you could probably use a normal get records API. But in case of if you have to perform any data sync with a third-party application, like you have to update fields in the third-party application from Zoho CRM, in that case you could probably go for the bulk read API. Like, let's say I have about 100 records I need to update now, and 500 10 minutes later, then you could probably wait and then send 600 API requests in a single call, and book, insert, update, and delete. It's like I said before, instead of making individual API calls, you could probably go for a single book API call, since there are about 200 requests available for one API call. And that's it for the new version of APIs.
A little bit on the Zoho community. Our community is a platform where partners, users, and product experts engage and talk all things CRM. We get a lot of ideas, useful tips and tricks, custom functions, and more. Feel free to come aboard and share any questions you might have in CRM, and also provide insight into features you would like to see in the future. We have offline meetups all over the world frequently, where our users, partners, and Zoho experts convene to talk CRM, share ideas, and meet with each other. Each of these meetups cover a bunch of features in Zoho CRM along with business scenarios to help you use your CRM better. We have a bunch of other online activities like the Ask the Experts session, daily challenges, and the more you contribute to the community, the closer you get to becoming one of our MVPs. Thank you for listening to this webinar. Please feel free to ask any related questions now. Thank you again everyone for joining us today. If you have more questions, please visit forums.zoho.com. You can also check out community.zoho.com. Thank you.